The Midnight Caller. Detective Alex Graves had seen a lot during his 15 years on the force. From brutal robberies to cold-blooded murders, there wasn't much that could shake him anymore, or so he thought. But there is something about the call he received that night that made the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. It was nearly midnight when the phone rang. The dispatcher's voice was low and tense. There had been a murder out on the outskirts of town, in an old farmhouse long abandoned. The victim was a young woman, found by passing motorists who'd seen lights flickering inside the supposedly deserted house. The details were vague, but one thing was clear. It was gruesome. Graves arrived at the scene within the hour. The farmhouse sat isolated at the end of a dirt road, surrounded by dense wood that seemed to swallow all the sound. A couple of patrol cars were already there, their lights cutting through the darkness. But aside from that, the place was eerily still. He stepped out of his car, the cold night air biting at his skin, and approached the house. Inside the house was dark and smelled of rot and mildew. His flashlight cut through the thick air, illuminating broken furniture and peeling wallpaper. The living room was in shambles, but it wasn't the disrepair of the house that caught his attention. No, it was the body. The woman was laying in the center of the room, sprawled across the floor in a pool of her blood. Her throat had been slashed deeply, and her wide, lifeless eyes stared up at the ceiling, frozen in terror. Her clothes were torn, her limbs twisted unnaturally, as if she struggled, fought for her life. Graves swallowed hard, stepping closer. He had seen brutal murders before, but this one felt personal. It was savage. Whoever had done this had enjoyed it. He crouched down, his flashlight swaying over her body. There was something familiar about her face, but he couldn't place it. She was young, mid-20s, with dark hair matted with blood. Her features seemed almost familiar, in a distant, nagging way. "An ID?" he asked the deputy, who had reluctantly followed him inside. "No, sir. Nothing. She wasn't carrying anything." Graves stood up and walked around the room, scanning for clues. There was no signs of forced entry, no obvious signs of struggle aside from the state of the victim. It was as if she had come here willingly. He ran his hand over his hair, his mind racing. Something about the scene felt off, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. He had an instinct for these things, a gut feeling that had served him well over the years, and right now that instinct was telling him there was more to this than met the eye. As he continued his search, Graves has noticed something strange. There are smudged footprints in the dust on the floor. He followed them with his flashlight, leading from the front door, through the living room and up a narrow staircase. "Stay down here," Graves instructed the deputy as he made his way towards the stairs. They creaked under his weight, the old wood groaning with every step. At the top, the hallway was narrow and dark, the air even colder than downstairs. He swept his flashlight around, revealing closed doors on either side. The first door led to a small bedroom, empty aside from a broken bed frame. The second was a bathroom, equally empty. But when he reached the third door at the end of the hall, something stopped him. It was slightly open, just a crack, but enough to reveal that the room beyond was pitch black. Graves hesitated for a moment before pushing the door open. His flashlight illuminated the room. It was bare, just 4 walls and an old ornate thing, its surface cracked and smeared with dust. Graves stepped closer, his breath catching in his throat. There was something strange about the mirror. It wasn't just cracked, it was shattered, as though someone had smashed with great force. But it wasn't the broken glass that bothered him. It was the reflection. In the dim light, Graves could see his own face in the fragments of the mirrors, but it was wrong. His reflection was disordered, twisted in a way that made his stomach turn. His eyes were too wide, his mouth stretched into a grotesque grin that didn't belong to him. He blinked, shaking his head, and the reflection was normal again. Just a trick of the light, he told himself. But unease crept through him. As he turned to leave, something caught his eyes in the corner of the room. A small, crumpled piece of paper lying on the floor, half hidden beneath the dust. He picked it up, unfolding it slowly. It was a photograph. A picture of a woman. The woman from downstairs. Graves stared at the photo, a knot tightening in his chest, and then suddenly it hit him. He knew why she looked so familiar. He had seen her before. But where? His mind raced, searching for the connection. And then, like a puzzle piece sliding into place, he remembered. She had been in the bar, the one outside the town. He had been there a few nights ago, having a drink, minding his own business. She had been there too, laughing with friends, catching his eye across the room. But it wasn't all. He remembered talking to her, flirting with her, buying her a drink, and then his breath caught in his throat, leaving with her. Suddenly a wave of nausea washed over him. He could see it all in his mind. Drive through the dark countryside, her laughter echoing in the car, the way the light had felt so charged. But something was wrong. His memory felt fractured, like bits and pieces were missing, like the edges of nightmare that faded as soon as he woke up. He stumbled back, his heart pounding in his chest. Could he have done this? Could he have killed her? Graves' hand trembled as he reached for his phone, dialing his friend. His mind was screaming that something was wrong, but he needed to talk to someone who could pull him out of his spiral. Before he could make the call, a cold draft swept through the room, and the lights flickered. The mirror in the front of him shattered, as though something was pressing against it from the other side. Graves froze, his eyes locked on the cracked glass, and then, out of the corner of his eyes, he saw movement. A shadow, dark and thin, slipped across the room's edge, moving impossibly fast. He whipped his head around, but the room was empty. He felt it again. Something watching him. The air grew heavier, colder. He could feel a presence now, a weight pressing against his chest, suffocating him. His skin prickled with the unmistakable sensation of eyes on him. The mirror, still cracked but intact, showed his reflection, but something was wrong. His reflection wasn't just distorted by cracks. It wasn't him. Doubt not on him. As he stood there, frozen, the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. Slow, deliberate, coming closer. He spun around, his heart in his throat, but the doorway was empty. The footsteps stopped just outside the room, as if someone was standing there, just out of sight. "Detective Graves?" the deputy called from downstairs, breaking the tension. "You found anything up there?" No, nothing," he muttered, his voice unsteady. He quickly left the room, moving down the stairs, his skin still tensed up. But as he reached the front door, something made him stop. He couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had been watching him in the room was still watching him. From the woods, from the dark corners of the house,